Welcome back, dear viewers, to the YouTube channel Doctor's Wisdom Share. I always look forward to seeing you again and sharing medical stories with you, and today's topic is diabetes. Yes, many people hold a belief that I would call shallow, though I'm not sure if that word is entirely fair. They feel diabetes is a disease of the rich, that only middle-aged or elderly people get it, and that diabetes is still very far away from them. In the past, I often heard the saying, turn a corner, and you meet a hero, but I think nowadays the more accurate saying should be turn a corner, and you meet diabetes. Because according to the statistics I've read, out of every 15 people to have diabetes, and out of every 10 people to have prediabetes. In Greek mythology, Zeus gave Pandora a secret box and warned her strictly not to open it. But out of curiosity, she opened it sadly. What poured out were misfortunes filling the world, wars, diseases, natural disasters. The only thing left inside was hope, the one thing human beings could cling to, hold on to, and use to keep life going. And I think diabetes is like Pandora's box as well. Once someone has diabetes, there can be more than 100 different complications, from necrosis of fingers and toes, to foot problems, to sudden death from a heart attack, to partial paralysis from a stroke. And with diabetes, people often end up relying on hope alone. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, some of you may say, why do good people still get diabetes? The question sounds a little funny, but yes, when you look at it, the number of people with diabetes is enormous. And up to 63% of people with diabetes have not yet been diagnosed. Those patients in hospital, those receiving treatment, those are only the visible tip of the iceberg. The undiagnosed group is far larger. And why does this happen? I believe the core issue is awareness of diabetes. Not only do patients and the general public lack adequate understanding, but even within our healthcare system, we still haven't prepared well enough in terms of social communication and public education so people can truly understand what diabetes is like. In fact, diabetes is an extremely hard disease to grasp. We feel it should be simple. Take a blood sugar test and you'll know whether you have diabetes. But in reality, it is a very complex disease interwoven with countless factors and mechanisms. If we don't know how to explain it in a simple way, we won't understand it. So I want to say this, just as Einstein said, no matter how difficult a problem is, we can still use the most everyday language to explain it clearly. And I truly hope that through this program, we can gain basic knowledge about diabetes so that once people understand it, we will know how to prevent it and also how to live safely with diabetes. Now I want to move to the question that I know viewers will be wondering about. Why do we get diabetes? If you read the materials, it can feel impossibly complicated, so complicated that we think we'll never understand it. But let's picture it like this. We start with blood sugar, glucose in the blood. Sugar is something we all know. Human beings, almost without exception, love sweet things, right? A newborn can only latch onto the mother's breast because the milk is sweet. Besides milk, sweets, candy, cake, pestos are exactly the kinds of things that attract children. So among the 7 billion people on this planet, almost everyone prefers sweet things. Bitter and spicy tastes usually take timeless collisions and experience before people gradually come to like them. But sweetness? We like it from the day we're born. Inside our bodies it's the same. The human body has about 75 trillion cells, and those 75 trillion cells are like the 7 billion people in the world. They also love sweetness. For a cell to survive, it needs sugar to produce energy. Sugar provides the energy that cells live on. So where does sugar come from? Think of it this way. Every day we eat and drink. All of our foods, especially starchy foods, and then many other foods and drinks go into the mouth, down to the stomach, and into the intestines. The stomach and intestines act like a factory. That factory converts what we eat into sugar. Picture a 3-hour window. Within about 3 hours, what we eat is processed by that factory stomach and intestines into sugar. And as soon as the sugar is produced, it enters the bloodstream. Now, the cells are hungry. Those 75 trillion hungry cells need sugar. They immediately place an order. And here we need to imagine a component called insulin, a hormone secreted by the pancreas. I like to compare insulin to a ride-hailing delivery driver. The cells are like customers. They want sugar from the blood, so the driver insulin transports sugar molecules to the cells, delivering energy so the cells can live. That is the simplest way to understand it. Food becomes sugar in the blood. Insulin, like a ride-hailing driver, delivers that sugar to the cells. But the problem is our lifestyle. We have a saying, food comes first. Human beings love eating and drinking. Some people have the habit of eating all day and all night, eating continuously, eating huge amounts. We drink alcohol, beer, liquor. We smoke. Our eating and drinking habits can be, frankly, unhealthy. When we consume too much, the factory's stomach and intestines produces too much sugar. That sugar floods into the blood. Insulin tries to deliver sugar from the blood to the cells, but when the cells have already had enough, then what happens? Sugar becomes excess in the bloodstream. And when there is excess sugar in the blood, insulin must perform another task, transporting the extra sugar to the liver for storage. Remember, the liver is a large organ that stores sugar, but storage has limits. A warehouse eventually fills up. And if we keep eating and drinking day and night, as I describe, pushing everything we think is nutritious into our bodies, then blood sugar keeps rising, higher and higher. At that point, insulin delivers sugar to the liver, but there is no space left. So what does the liver do? It converts the excess sugar when it can no longer be stored into fat. That leads to fatty liver. And when the liver becomes overloaded with fat, it starts pushing fat back into the blood, leading to high blood lipids. So you can see, if we eat too much, constantly, indiscriminate lifeless alcohol, smoking, and so on, then first, blood sugar rises. Second, sugar is converted into fat, leading to abnormal lipids and fatty liver. Those are the earliest processes. Next, imagine this: the cells, after receiving sugar delivered by driver insulin, eventually behave like people too. They take a holiday. They close the door and stop accepting deliveries. They refuse to receive sugar. So insulin arrives at the cell's door, but the cell refuses, like a customer who cancels the order. In that case, insulin doesn't know what to do. It keeps circulating in the blood, with sugar still stuck in the bloodstream. Leaving sugar in the blood is not okay. Sending it to the liver turns it into fat. Fat overflows back into the blood and it keeps circling. That circulating excess sugar is what we call prediabetes or diabetes. At this stage, the human body does something remarkable. The command center for insulin sees that sugar is accumulating in the blood, so it orders insulin to work at full capacity day and night, non-stop. This full capacity state, in medical terminology, is called insulin resistance. In other words, the first stage of diabetes is insulin resistance. But if insulin works at full capacity and still can't solve the problem while we keep eating and blood sugar keeps rising, then another phenomenon appears. The command center becomes smarter. It's as if the first insulin drivers were only high school graduates, not persuasive enough to convince the cells. So the command center recruits college graduates, masters, PhDs, even professors, mobilizing the elite workforce as delivery drivers. When this elite team is mobilized, the cells may be pushed into consuming sugar again. In professional terms, we call this excessive insulin production and secretion, maximal recruitment of insulin capacity. This is the stage of true diabetes. And once we enter true diabetes, we fall under a kind of curse. Once we have the disease, we carry it for life and it cannot be cured. The only thing we can do is treat it to keep blood sugar from rising and to prevent complications. Once you have diabetes, I can state clearly, you will not be cured. Up to this moment, science can build spacecraft and countless modern technologies, but we still have not conquered diabetes. We cannot cure it, we can only control blood sugar and try to prevent diabetic complications so that in the end we do not pay the price with death. That's why I want to remind you, through this simplified explanation, insulin as a ride-hailing driver, cells ordering and canceling. Once you understand the mechanism, you will understand that when we cannot control our mods and our habits, the price we pay is diabetes. Diabetes itself is not always the scariest part, but its complications are extremely dangerous. Mildly, you can lose fingers or toes. I see such patients every day. Severely, you can die suddenly from cardiovascular disease, from myocardial infarction, or you can become partially paralyzed, even die from stroke. These are issues we must take very seriously. If we understand the mechanism, we will know how to control our eating so we don't end up with diabetes. As someone who communicates medical knowledge, I also often follow public events so I can share timely, necessary health information with you. World Diabetes Day is November 14th, and its logo is a blue circlia, global symbol of diabetes awareness, representing unity of the worldwide diabetes community in responding to the diabetes epidemic. The blue color also symbolizes life and hope, and serves as a flag for prevention and resistance against diabetes. In healthcare, I could roughly list a huge number of commemorative health days just to name a few: tropical diseases, leprosy, hearing, tuberculosis, Chagas disease, malaria, hepatitis, Alzheimer's, rabies, patient safety, food safety, health, hand hygiene, mental health, immunization week, blood donation, armor awareness, breast cancer, anti-cancer, drowning prevention, tobacco control. I'm getting tired just listing them. There are more than 30 such days, and every one is important and draws attention from the press and the public. People often hold large meetings and promote them widely. But back to World Diabetes Day, November 14. What is special about it? If you think there are so many commemorative days, you might feel there's nothing special about this one either. But that is not true. Diabetes has something extremely unique here. Among those 30-plus commemorative days, most are proposed by the World Health Organization to create a public impression and drive communication that changes awareness. But diabetes is different. Its key commemorative days were proposed by the United Nations, not WHO. And the United Nations operates at an even higher level. Think about it. The UN addresses massive global issues, war, and huge social welfare concerns affecting the entire world. When the UN intervenes, it becomes policy that countries are expected to follow strictly and seriously. So diabetes, as a disease, is a threat to global health security, too serious, too frightening. That is why the UN had to step in, and the UN chose November 14th as World Diabetes Day. This reminds us that when an organization as important as the UN must take charge, it means this day is special and this disease is exceptionally serious. You already know the symbol, the blue ring, like a blue circle or a blue band, blue like the sky, and the ocean expressing humanity's longing to control diabetes and solve this disease. But to control it and solve it, the road is still very long. I want to emphasize again, World Diabetes Day, November 14th, is special because of uninvolvement, and it is also connected to the man who discovered and extracted insulin for diabetes treatment, Banting. The date relates to his birthday. His birth date was chosen as the commemorative date. Now let me share another story. More than 3,000 years ago, ancient Egypt described a condition that appears to resemble diabetes, including symptoms such as frequent urination, thirst, and weight loss. In ancient India, people discovered a way to test for diabetes using ants. They would observe urine, and if ants gathered heavily around it, the condition was described. Let me read this carefully: Asmadhumeha, meaning honey urine, because it attracted ants. In the 3rd century BCE, Apollonius of Memphis mentioned diabetes, what I believe is one of the earliest references. By the 5th century CE, differences between type 1 and type 2 diabetes were recognized in India and China. Type 2 was more common in obese and wealthy people, those who were inactive and ate a lot. In the Middle Ages, diabetes was considered a kidney disease rather than damage to the pancreas. The key to diabetes treatment, up to today, is still insulin, a hormone secreted by the pancreas to deal with sugar in the blood, the ride-hailing driver in my analogy, transporting sugar from blood to cells so cells can use it as energy and stay alive. That's the simple understanding. But to understand insulin more deeply, I think we should tell the story of Banting, how he extracted insulin and treated a 1-year-old boy, Thompson, at the beginning of the 20th century, before 1920, to having diabetes, was effectively receiving a confirmed death sentence. There was no treatment. But after insulin was extracted in 1922, we could finally help patients with diabetes. Banting's story is fascinating. First, he was a poor student, bad at studying, extremely weak academically. But he had something rare, persistence beyond what most people can imagine. And it was precisely that persistence, combined with his poor academic background, that led him to win the Nobel Prize in Medicine extracting insulin and saving the world from what had been a death sentence. In 1912, Banting, a Canadian, applied to medical school and failed. His scores were too low. In 1913, Canada decided to expand admissions rapidly to train doctors for the battlefield, shortening training time. Normally, medical training used to take at least 6 years and often 9 to 15 years. For example, in diagnostic imaging, it can take 15 years before you can practice independently. But World War I created an urgent demand. They expanded admissions and shortened training, and Banting benefited from that timing. He entered medical school, but studied only 3 years too short for serious hospital practice. He learned mostly from textbooks, with little real clinical training. And we all know, you can read 1,000 medical books, but without mentorship in hospitals and real patients, you can't truly become a doctor. You become a guess and treat healer, not a physician. In 1916, Banting graduated from the University of Toronto and went to war as part of the army. But because he lacked training, he mostly did basic wound care, bandaging, and disinfection rather than real diagnosis or surgery. In 1920, he was discharged and returned to Canada. He tried to work in a clinic, but he couldn't treat patients well, so no patients came. In 28 days, not a single patient showed up. On the 28th day, one patient came, a war veteran addicted to alcohol, disillusioned by war. He came only to buy medical alcohol used for disinfection, cheap alcohol so he could drink it. Banting earned $4 his only income, then he was fired. After that, he returned and applied to become an assistant instructor for a professor who was a world-famous diabetes expert, Professor McLeod. This was a lucky turn. Banting suddenly became connected to a leading diabetes authority. But Banting's knowledge was shallow. Diabetes was still a mysterious, fatal disease. He could barely understand it. Then came the historic night, October 30th, 1920. Feeling depressed, he read an article describing experiments in dogs. If the pancreatic duct was tied off, blocking the exocrine pancreas from releasing digestive enzymes into the intestine, then the exocrine tissue would degenerate, but the endocrine part, the islets producing insulin, would remain. The pancreas has two broad functions. The exocrine part produces digestive enzymes. The endocrine part, such as the islets of Langerhans, produces insulin. Banting read this, and he was electrified. He said, "I can find a substance to treat diabetes." He immediately wrote down his idea: use dogs, surgically tie off the pancreatic duct so the exocrine tissue degenerates. Later remove the pancreas, grind and extract it to obtain a solution, then inject that solution into diabetic dogs. He took his notes to his professor to seek support. But after seeing Banting's paper full of spelling mistakes and what looked like foolish proposals, the professor dismissed it. Banting, however, kept thinking about it day and night. By May 1920, he continued pressing his professor. The professor, irritated, wanted to use the summer break to get rid of the troublesome student. He left Banting in charge of the laboratory and basically said, "Do whatever you want," believing Banting would ruin the lab and be fired upon the professor's return. But during that time, a brilliant student stayed in the lab. Banting teamed up with him. They began operating on dogs. The student was not trained enough to do major surgery. He assisted. Banting was the main surgeon, but because Banting lacked proper medical training, he killed dog after dog. The professor had 14 dogs. Banting operated and all 14 died, some from severe bleeding, some from anesthesia overdose, some from surgical mistakes. After that, Banting persuaded the student to invest money to buy more dogs. He operated on 91 dogs, and all 91 died. Even now, I don't understand how Banting's persistence could reach that level. Then, on the 92nd dog, the dog survived. He successfully tied off the duct, waited a week, re-operated, removed the pancreas, soaked and ground it, extracted the solution, and injected it into diabetic dogs. Blood sugar fell. He realized he had succeeded. When the professor returned, ready to fire him, Banting presented the results. The pancreatic extract lowered blood sugar in diabetic dogs. The professor, being the world's top diabetes expert, immediately recognized how huge this was. That is why Banting and the professor were jointly associated with the Nobel Prize for the discovery of insulin. But the story doesn't stop there. Banting realized buying dogs was expensive and difficult. He and the student temporarily left the clinic work and went to a slaughterhouse, specifically slaughtering cattle. Banting asked for the pancreas of slaughtered cattle. In the West, organ meats were not widely eaten. He took the pancreases for research, but he couldn't tie off ducks and live cattle, and no slaughterhouse owner would accept that. So he wondered how to destroy the exocrine tissue while preserving the endocrine part. He tried soaking pancreas tissue in alcohol, and indeed, alcohol caused pancreatic tissue damage. Exocrine parts necrosed while endocrine elements could remain. This became another step forward. Then a leading biochemist, Collop, arrived at the lab. He saw their work and used biochemical methods, precipitation, separation, purification to extract insulin in a purer form. Many doctors today forget Collop, thinking he merely benefited from others' work. But I believe his role was crucial. Without purification, injecting crude pancreatic mash into humans would have been deadly, full of impurities, triggering severe allergic reactions or anaphylaxis. Collop's work made insulin usable. Once they obtained reasonably purified insulin, they injected it into the 1-year-old boy Thompson. Thompson was critically ill, expected to live only 1 or 2 more weeks. His family consented to the injection. After treatment, he lived 13 more years with diabetes. From that point forward, diabetes, a death sentence, became a disease that could be controlled by insulin. People camped in tents around Banting's lab, thousands of diabetic children and patients waiting for insulin extracted from cattle, purified, and administered. The historical story may be long, but it is meaningful. It can motivate us to keep exploring, to push for breakthroughs. Anyone watching today, especially those living with diabetes, and those who must inject insulin, should say thank you to the people who extracted and purified insulin. And let me add another point. Diabetes refers to a group of metabolic disorders affecting glucose, protein, fats, water, and electrolytes, caused by multiple factors: genetics, endocrine dysfunction, or an unbalanced diet leading to impaired islet function, insulin resistance, and diabetes. The World Health Organization classifies diabetes into 4 types: type 1 with absolute insulin deficiency, type 2 with relative insulin deficiency, gestational diabetes, and other special types. Confirming and classifying diabetes is not difficult based on clinical presentation and tests. These are easy to find on the internet, and I won't repeat them. But complications are extremely complex, as I said at the beginning, more than 100 complications. In 1922, diabetes was a death sentence, even after insulin was discovered, with over 100 complications. Diabetes remains dangerous and serious, often considered the 3rd most significant threat to human health after cancer and cardiovascular cerebrovascular diseases. The most frightening thing about diabetes is its complications. Diabetes is like a soft knife, slowly damaging vital organs, causing blindness, amputations, heart disease, stroke, posing severe risks to people with diabetes. Now that we understand a little about the mechanism of diabetes, as I've just laid out, let's go a bit deeper. In the mechanism of diabetes, the first stage is a disorder of glucose metabolism, right? In other words, sugar is delivered to the cells, but the cells can't use it. So glucose metabolism becomes disordered and blood sugar rises. Then that excess sugar in the blood goes to the liver, and the liver converts it into fat, right? That fat leads to fatty liver, and then the liver pushes fat back into the bloodstream, causing high blood lipids. So that is lipid metabolism disorder. But when someone has diabetes, what is the essence of the disease? The essence is that cells can no longer use glucose. Insulin delivers it, but the cell cannot use it. The cell refuses sugar and can't use it, and then the cell either dies, right, or it has to survive upon an alternative fuel, an alternative source of energy. And what are those alternatives? 1 is protein, and 2 is fat. The body will shift to metabolizing protein and fat to use them as energy so the cell can keep living. So here I want to summarize. First, cells prioritize glucose because glucose is the most important and the best fuel for survival. Cells depend on sugar. But once diabetes occurs, cells can't use glucose anymore, so they must rely on the next sources, protein and fat. That means diabetes produces three kinds of metabolic disorders. The first is disordered glucose metabolism, the second is disordered protein metabolism, and the third is disordered fat metabolism. Those three disorders can create truly brutal disasters for the human body. Now, in diabetes there are two types of complications: acute complications and chronic complications. If we want to classify them, we divide them into acute and chronic. For acute complications, there are three that are very dangerous. The first and most common is ketoacidosis. You can see why. I just explained that when cells can't use glucose, the body has to metabolize protein and fat. In the process of metabolizing protein and fat, we can picture it like this. Protein and fat enter the cellular cycle and are burned to generate energy, ATP, and the waste products are CoA and water. Normally, it should be exactly that. Protein and fat are burned, energy is produced so the cell can live, CoA is produced for us to breathe out, and water is produced and eliminated through urine. That's how it should be. But because the metabolism is disordered, the breakdown of protein and fat doesn't reach the final products. Instead, it produces intermediate chemical substances, ketone bodies. Ketone bodies are acids, and they cause metabolic acidosis. And diabetic ketoacidosis is a very severe acute complication. But there are two other extremely dangerous acute complications. The second is that blood sugar rises to such a high level that it increases osmotic pressure. What does increased osmotic pressure mean? In simple terms, water gets pulled from outside into the blood vessels. When water is drawn into the bloodstream like that, it affects the brain and can lead to coma due to hyperosmolarity. If the patient isn't rescued in time, the price can be death. That is the second extremely dangerous complication, hyperosmolar coma in diabetes. The third acute complication, also extremely dangerous and life-threatening, is hypoglycemia. Blood sugar can drop suddenly, and if you don't replenish sugar in time, it can lead to death. So those are the three acute complications that we commonly encounter. As for chronic complications, there are many more than 100 chronic complications. Think again about the process I described: disordered glucose metabolism, disordered fat metabolism, disordered protein metabolism. Those disorders create intermediate chemical substances, and they also create the condition of elevated blood lipids. Blood fats rise. Meanwhile, those intermediate substances in the blood also rise, and this leads to damage to the inner lining of blood vessels. Vessel damage begins with inflammation inside the vessel, volatile inflammatory lesions, little ulcer-like injuries. Then the excess blood fats in the blood come and coat those injured areas. Gradually, this forms atherosclerotic plaques. Now imagine, the total length of blood vessels in the human body is about 86 kilometers. If I round it off, let's say around 90 kilometers. With about 90 kilometers of blood vessels, you can picture that we have large vessels like the carotid artery, the aorta, the renal arteries feeding internal organs, and we also have small vessels, the microvasculature, the capillaries. If large vessels are damaged, what can happen? We can get serious complications such as stroke, for example, blockage of the carotid artery or major cerebral arteries. If the heart's vessels are affected, we can get myocardial infarction. Those are extremely dangerous complications. If the renal vessels are affected, there can be renal infarction. And if the limb arteries are blocked, we can get limb ischemia, leading to necrosis of the feet or legs, and so on. Those are the kinds of complications that come from large vessel atherosclerosis, narrowing, blockage, and organ damage. Next is microvascular damage. With capillaries, the organs that have the densest capillary networks are the most vulnerable. Which organ has the most capillaries? The kidney. Everything in the blood flows to the kidney. The kidney filters and then excretes in urine. So the kidney has an extremely rich capillary system. That's why diabetes can damage the kidneys. Several patients can develop nephritis, kidney failure. Diabetic kidney damage can be very intense. Another place we often see is the eye. The retina at the back of the eye must have capillary circulation for us to see. If capillaries are blocked by fat, blocked by debris and harmful substances, then retinal degeneration occurs, cataracts develop, and vision declines. Mildly, vision decreases. Severely, patients go blind. And there are other sites where microvascular damage is obvious. Fingertips, toes capillaries can easily become blocked, leading to ulcers and tissue necrosis. In short, any location can suffer blood vessel injury, and vessel injury leads to complications in that organ or tissue, often dangerous. There is also another point we already know. Since ancient times, people observed that ants could be used to diagnose diabetes because ants gather around sweet urine. Sugar is something most living organisms are drawn to. Bacteria love sugar too. So when blood sugar is high and sugar spreads through tissues and organs, infections become easier. Bacteria grow readily. That's why inflammatory and infectious conditions associated with diabetes are very common. So if we consider the body's organ systems, 8 major systems, and the complications of diabetes appear as more than 100 chronic complications. Those complications are extremely dangerous. Many complications can lead to death: pneumonia, myocardial infarction, kidney failure, stroke, blindness, severe ulcers, necrosis. Any of these can cost us our lives. So here I want to say, if we classify complications by following the mechanism, we can quickly understand what diabetes will lead to: acute complications and chronic complications. As I've just explained, many of them, and every one of them can be dangerous. Among the many chronic complications, the ones I care about most are the heart and brain complications of diabetes. Many people fear these the most as well. I call them diabetic heart and diabetic brain. The names may sound not too frightening, but the reality is terrifying. So the question becomes, to escape these killers, diabetic heart and diabetic brain, should we aggressively inject insulin so we can push blood sugar down as low as possible? Can we do that? I think this is an excellent question, and it is quite advanced. Historically, if we look back in the 1950s, after insulin became available, people believed that to control diabetes and prevent complications, you simply injected insulin to lower blood sugar, because high blood sugar causes diabetes. So if you lower blood sugar, the disease should be solved. They believed that strongly. But later, a group of doctors rose up in opposition. They warned, be careful, the problem may not be that simple. Injecting insulin might not automatically be good. Maybe keeping blood sugar a bit higher might even be safer in some cases. The two sides argued fiercely. That argument demanded research. Researchers conducted long studies, more than a decade, nearly 20 years. By the 1980s, the conclusion became firm. Treating diabetes with insulin to lower blood sugar was indeed a key and very important strategy for controlling the disease. People formed a strong belief: once you have diabetes, you must keep blood sugar down toward the normal range. You cannot let it stay high. That belief became widely accepted, almost like a truth. But then another group emerged again and said, be careful. If you control blood sugar too aggressively, the rates of stroke and myocardial infarction might actually increase. People began to suspect that. The debate erupted again, and more large, well-designed studies were done with enormous sample sizes. Then the first major reports came out showing something alarming. If you lower blood sugar in an extreme way, pushing it down hard, believing that this alone means controlled diabetes and therefore no complications, and you compare that to a group that controls blood sugar in a more moderate, acceptable way. The extreme control group had higher rates of stroke, higher rates of myocardial infarction, and higher cardiovascular risk overall. So what is the issue here? The issue is that complications are not caused by sugar alone. Disordered glucose metabolism is only one factor. Disordered fat metabolism, disordered protein metabolism, plus other disorders, water and electrolyte imbalance, are also extremely dangerous in diabetes. So if we only lower blood sugar, it may not be enough. In some cases, lowering blood sugar too aggressively may trigger or worsen those other disorders, creating danger. And regarding vascular injury, especially in the brain and heart, the major problem is atherosclerosis in large vessels and inflammatory injury in small vessels. So controlling blood sugar alone is not sufficient. Therefore, based on these findings, new recommendations emerge. In diabetes control and insulin use, there is no single formula for every patient. Treatment must be individualized. A person's body type then or overweight changes insulin needs. Lifestyle and personal characteristics matter. Doctors must adjust therapy to fit each patient. It is not true that pushing blood sugar below the normal threshold automatically equals safety. It doesn't work like that. So insulin therapy became individualized and it became an art. From the 1990s onward, people started paying close attention to this. From the 2000s to now, it has become especially emphasized. Insulin treatment is no longer about extreme lowering. That's why specialist doctors focus heavily on diabetic heart and diabetic brain. How do we individualize therapy so a patient avoids stroke and avoids cardiac injury? That is a very difficult challenge for each doctor treating diabetes. Let me share a small story. More than 10 years ago, people widely claimed that bitter gourd was an herb that could cure diabetes. I think this rumor is quite common. In daily life, I often meet diabetic patients who treat bitter melon as something almost miraculous. They believe it can control blood sugar. They believe it can treat diabetes. Many people believe this. I even know some people in the medical field who also believe it. So why does such belief arise? I want to broaden the discussion a bit. It likely comes from a psychology of dieting to cure disease and dieting to prevent disease, and from various extreme trends. Diabetic patients are often extremely strict with dieting. I have to admit, that's true. And where does it come from? Sometimes it comes from literature, art, films. One of the people who, in my opinion, contributed to many exaggerated rumors in medicine is Jin Yong, the writer of martial arts novels. In The Legend of the Condor Heroes, there is a character Xiao Long, the little dragon maiden, beautiful and remarkable, but she is poisoned. There is no antidote. By luck she falls into a valley, and she lives there for 16 years, eating only honey and white fish hands. Somehow she detoxifies, recovers her health, and so on. Stories like that, presented through film and fiction, lead people to believe honey and white fish can cure poison. And then people generalize it into a mindset. Eat food X to cure disease X. Eat food X to prevent disease X. From that kind of thinking, rumors rust like bitter melon cures diabetes. In reality, the question of whether bitter melon can cure diabetes has been asked since the 1980s. Scientists studied its components. First, I must say, for all diabetic patients, diet is extremely important. I often tell you, search on Google for the glycemic index of any food. The glycemic index (GI) reflects how quickly a food raises blood sugar after you eat it. There are 3 levels: low, medium, and high. If a food is high GI, it can be dangerous for diabetics and should be avoided. Medium GI is acceptable. Low GI is safer and recommended. So what about bitter melon? Its GI is about 24. If GI is below 55, that's considered low. From 56 to 69 is medium. From 70 and above is high. Bitter melon at 24 is low. Cucumber is even 23, very low. So bitter melon and cucumber are safe choices. But foods like pumpkin, for example, its GI is around 75, above 70 high. That means pumpkin is not safe in large amounts. Diabetics should eat only a small amount. Eating too much can be dangerous. So return to bitter melon and diabetes. The first point is that bitter melon has a very low GI, so it's safe. Second, it has relatively low carbohydrate content and high fiber. It also contains many vitamins. That's why bitter melon fits diabetic diets well. So I can confirm, bitter melon is a very good food choice for diabetics for the reasons I just mentioned. But does it treat diabetes? That is a completely different question. Bitter melon contains several substances for component it have blood sugar lowering effects. They can mimic insulin. They are polypeptides that act like insulin and can reduce blood sugar. Because of that, people thought bitter melon could cure diabetes. In the 1980s, scientists extracted these components and injected them into diabetic mice. Subcutaneous injection and intraperitoneal injection. Those insulin-like components in bitter melon are the same. Injection is not the same as oral intake. If you eat it or drink an extract, digestive enzymes break it down, and it no longer has the sugar-lowering effect. In the 1990s, American scientists conducted fairly rigorous studies. They made highly purified bitter melon extracts and had volunteers with diabetes drink it daily, comparing them to a group that didn't. The result, there was no meaningful difference. In other words, it was ineffective. So up to now, I can state clearly, bitter melon is good for diabetics as a food because its GI is low, around 24, fiber is high, carbohydrates are low, vitamins are abundant. But believing that bitter melon can control blood sugar and lower it as a treatment is a different matter. It is not true in that sense. That medication came from a discovery in the late 1980s. Researchers found a substance in the saliva gland of a lizard. When taken orally, that substance stimulates the pancreas to secrete insulin. That is completely different from swallowing something that mimics insulin. A substance that stimulates the pancreas is not the same as insulin, like polypeptides that are destroyed in digestion. They are fundamentally different. So here I want to warn everyone, it's not only bitter melon, there are many other supplements and products that people spend money on, often wasting money, and they do not solve the real problem. Up to now, the core of diabetes treatment is still insulin. As supportive treatment, there is that lizard saliva-derived mechanism I mentioned. But you should not believe other exaggerated rumors and spend money chasing diabetes cures. Don't do that. If you have followed from the beginning until now, you will see diabetes treatment is not as easy as just inject insulin. It is not easy at all. I just explained that today. Diabetes treatment must be individualized and art for each doctor. I have a very close friend, and I'm sure his husband and wife are watching this program carefully today. Both of them and their child have diabetes. My friend is very wealthy. His wife is the CEO of a large corporation. They have a lot of money. They traveled to this country and that country, America, the UK, Europe, Singapore, seeking diabetes treatment, but it didn't solve the problem. It became extremely difficult. But when I introduced them to a doctor, after she consulted them, wrote a prescription, guided their diet, guided their treatment, everything returned to normal and became very good. My friend respected her immensely and even introduced other friends to her for consultation. Then he was surprised. He said, "Why did that doctor advise me one way, but for someone else she advised a different way? My medication plan is different. Their medication plan is different." Here is the point. In diabetes, no one is the same. Each person needs a different treatment approach, and each person needs a different diet plan. No two patients are identical. So if you want the shortest answer about diet for diabetes, I will state it plainly. There is no universal formula for all diabetic patients. Each patient will have their own diet plan and lifestyle plan. No two patients are the same. That is the shortest answer. If you want the full answer, it becomes very long. To build a diet plan for a diabetic patient, we must consider the person's culture. For example, a Buddhist differs from a Muslim, right? Eastern culture differs from Western culture. Each person has different cultural views. We must consider social circumstances, personal preferences, and the person's physical condition, overweight or thin, weak or strong, and so on. Everyone needs a different diet. There is no single diet that fits everyone. And not only for diabetes, but for all illnesses and even for healthy people. I always remind you, food is medicine. Meals are medicine. Eating is a method of treatment. You must learn how to eat scientifically and in a way that truly fits your own body. The medicine of the future is prevention, preventing disease before it becomes visible, before it develops into a full-blown condition. And to do that, a good diet is essential. Diet is considered the first factor of modern medicine, individualized medicine, and precision medicine of the future. And diabetes is the same. Each of us has our own diet plan. No one is the same. So what should you do? First, you must listen to and understand your own body. Then learn nutritional knowledge. Next, you must discuss directly and carefully with the doctor treating your diabetes to find a reasonable diet plan. Even more, you should also find a nutrition specialist, doctors who truly understand nutrition. I'm glad that in this program, I've seen some doctors ask me, how can they gain nutrition knowledge like what I present on my YouTube channel? And they ask me for methods and reference materials. So understand your self-talk with your diabetes doctor, consult a nutrition doctor, and build your own diet plan. And I repeat, diabetes itself is not always the most dangerous thing its complications are. Diabetes has too many complications, and too many people pay the price with death. So you must take this disease seriously, and you must treat eating as a method to control diabetes and treat diabetes so you can live with it in a healthy way. So in summary, I affirm, there is no single universal formula for all diabetic patients. Many dietary rules that circulate are only for reference, so you use them as a base to build your own plan. When a person is diagnosed with diabetes, they often hear, diabetes is a long-term chronic disease. You must take medication for life to prevent complications. This has become a golden rule in diabetes treatment. However, with new technologies and new concepts, people continue to develop and study methods that may allow some individuals to stop medication long-term while maintaining stable blood sugar, as surgical approaches to diabetes that I have heard about. What is the truth of that method? Surely many patients would never imagine diabetes could be treated with surgery, right? I believe no one would think that. Even I, working in medicine, have not personally seen people undergoing surgery specifically to treat diabetes. But it does exist. This story began with an American doctor in the 1990s who specialized in bariatric surgery, weight loss surgery. At first, one of the patients came back and told him, "After you operated on me, my blood sugar improved a lot, and gradually I stopped taking medication. I don't need medication anymore." He didn't believe it. He thought it was coincidence. But gradually, more and more patients reported the same thing, and he became curious. He conducted a study on 147 patients who underwent weight loss surgery, and he found that blood sugar control improved significantly. Some patients reduced insulin, some stopped insulin entirely. He was shocked. He published the study, and at first the medical community thought he was absurd. How could surgery cure diabetes? But later, doctors paid attention to these outcomes, and they found there really was value. Eventually, the American Diabetes Association, International Diabetes Associations, and even the World Health Organization began issuing recommendations for type 2 diabetes patients who meet criteria for bariatric surgery. Surgery can be considered. What is the surgery? Since eating drives diabetes, weight loss surgery targets eating. One technique is to reduce stomach volume, either remove part of the stomach so patients feel full quickly, or place a band or balloon system. Some systems even have a pump-like device near the rib area. When hunger rises, they inflate the device and the stomach feels full, reducing intake. These are weight loss procedures, and in these procedures, by changing eating behavior, blood sugar can decrease, and some patients can control diabetes better. Some countries set criteria, for example, age roughly 16 to 65, BMI above 32.5, and it must be type 2 diabetes, not type 1. Type 1 is the childhood, more genetic form. Type 2 is mostly acquired and linked to lifestyle and diet. In addition, pancreatic function must still exist. Tests must show the endocrine pancreas can still secrete insulin. If pancreatic function is already severely lost, surgery won't solve the problem. So today, many professionals advise, if a diabetic patient meets criteria and is obese, they can consult major surgical centers to evaluate whether weight loss surgery is appropriate. At minimum, reducing stomach capacity can help weight control and may help reduce blood sugar, and if someone stabilizes after surgery, that is a very good outcome. I think this is information many diabetic patients should be aware of. This diabetes episode today has become a bit longer than others, but it is full of medical knowledge. And I think there are many questions about diabetes, many rumors, many baseless claims. People believe them because when we are sick, we pray everywhere. We grasp at anything that might cure us. But for now, this episode about diabetes will stop here. Thank you for watching and for your attention. See you again in the next programs.